I'm just a honorary director of the Kyoto Museum for World Peace, the Ritsumeikan University, and this was established in 1992. Since that time, the museum has been visited by 900,000 people, including many young generation. It's very important, I think. And this was said that the first university-attached peace museum in the world at that time, and it is still now, to my regret. And the Ritsumeikan University was once a very militaristic university in 1920s to 1940s. In 1928, the Ritsumeikan even organized the armed unit called the King Eitai, which is the armed unit to guard the emperor's palace in the center of the city. And 3 years later, in 1931, there was the Manchurian incident, as you know, and the man called Ishiwara Kanji was very active behind the curtain or behind the scene of Manchurian incident. But 10 years later, the Ritsumeikan invited him as the professor of the Ritsumeikan University, and Ishiwara Kanji played the first director of the National Defense Study Institute of Ritsumeikan University. And in 1943 on, the Ritsumeikan sent some 3,000 students to the front, and about 1,000 students were driven to death. And the similar number of students were also sent to the military factories to produce munitions and bombs and airplanes. And at that time, we had so many international students from Taiwan and Korean peninsula, but Ritsumeikan even expelled them because they didn't want to become the soldier, emperor's soldier. So Ritsumeikan was so militaristic at that time. And not only Ritsumeikan, of course, I know, but Ritsumeikan was especially militaristic university. So the Douglas MacArthur once enumerated 3 universities to be abolished just after the World War II. One was the Kokushikan University in Tokyo. The second one is Kogakan in Mie Prefecture. And the third one was Ritsumeikan. So Ritsumeikan itself was very cooperative with the war policy of the Japanese government. And Japan was the invade the Asia Pacific country at the time, and in retaliation, Japanese people experienced the air raids. I'm just writing 5 volumes of book about air raid, which was experienced by the people in 47 different prefectures, and about I think 700,000 people are driven to death by the air raids, including a great Tokyo air raid on the March the 10th, 1945.
Let me just put in a little
yes,
bit
yes.
there. The air raids in Germany killed about 600,000.
600,000.
In the book Der Brand of Friedrichs, it's very well documented. It's very important because these topics have been taboo for a long time. That was the victor's side of the story. Of course, we had to kill a little bit in order to win over these people. And now it comes out. I'm very happy to hear that. 5 volumes.
And of course, Japanese people experienced the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So just after the World War II, Japanese people thought that peace is the most important thing. And this was the fundamental potential to produce that peace constitution, I think. So as you said, the Japanese Article 9 of the Constitution of Japan is not the peaceful constitution or the constitution for active peace.
It's a no-war constitution, and that's already good. That's already good, and I think the philosophy was, and it's expressed in the preamble, that Japan shall never be visited upon Japan the horrors of war. Now let us only add that one horror of war is to be defeated. So that was maybe one of the right-wing arguments defense. They didn't like being defeated, of course not. Nobody likes, as a matter of fact. So that's one of the horrors, and as you point out, at that time there probably was a positive attitude to Article 9.
But for the Japanese people, to avoid the war was the most important thing just after the World War.
And right
fought.
now, in this moment, United States of America is fighting two of the worst wars in human history. Two of the worst because of the weapons they use.
Yes.
For instance, depleted uranium, follow-up of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, in Afghanistan, with horrible effects also on unborn babies. Horrible effects, and Japan is helping. Japan does not have what I call a combat role. It's not actively doing war, but it is helping one country that is doing more war than almost any other country in human history. And of course they call it defense. Everybody calls it defense, so that is not very original. So the question is, and I guess that's what we are going to talk about now, what happened in the meantime? I mean, on the one hand, as you laid it out, Professor Anzai, and I incidentally, my name is Johan Galtung, and I'm a peace researcher and peace worker, as I call it, been very active, and this is my 50th anniversary of activity. I myself am 77, but I got started in 1958, both at times relatively deep research and with very active peace work. So we are now in a situation where you laid out the beginning, the thing that led up to Article 9. And right now we have the Japanese government subverting and perverting it and assisting, helping in solidarity in a horrifying war. And we can go into what happened in the meantime, but I would like to ask one question also to some extent to viewers. What happened to Japan when the United States loses these wars and pulls out? It has done so before. Vietnam was an example. Japan played a certain role at that time too, but now it is much more pronounced, much more explicit role. And the Japanese so-called self-defense forces now moving into international waters, moving west, where they have nothing to do. It is not the Japanese self that they can be defending there. So what will happen when the United States loses the wars? And I can put the question a slightly different way. Is there a limit to what the Japanese government can accept? Is there a limit, or do they actually suppose that the United States will continue winning, like it was victorious over Japan, over military Japan?
Yes. And we know that there are some more than 130 US bases in this country, and the military budget is almost $50 billion a year. That is the fourth greatest
for the bases.
For the not only bases but the self-defense forces.
For the self-defense forces. It's number 4 in the world, isn't it?
Yes, I think so.
Exactly. So it is enormous. In other words, and it has the type of weaponry that we characterize as offensive, namely a long radius of action. It plays an international role and can play much more international role if it's so wanted. Highly offensive. The defensive aspect is much less pronounced. Now, as we know very well, Article 9 is not against weapons. It's against going to war. So there is a room within Article 9 for real self-defense, but that has to be with defensive weapons. But that has to be with, let us say, local, what they used to call territorial weapons, that can be used in this prefecture and that prefecture and that prefecture. But that's not what it is. Self-defense forces has Air Force, has Navy, which does not belong in territorial self-defense, and has an army that can be dispatched.
All this kind of different or the wrong interpretation of Japanese constitution began in 1947, just after the enactment of this constitution.
It started immediately, huh?
Yes, quite immediately. And at that time, I have the Article 9 here, And one of the controversies is that the interpretation about the paragraph 2, the beginning, in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, what is the preceding paragraph, the aim of the preceding paragraph? There are different opinions, viewpoints about that. The preceding paragraphs say that Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of the force as means of settling international disputes. So the forces not for international disputes, which means the forces for self-defense, is not against the constitution, they said. But in 1947, in the process of the enactment of the constitution, already the Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida responded quite clearly in that discussion that he answered that he was asked in the National Diet that forces for self-defense is not against the constitution, he was asked, but he clearly responded that almost all wars have been fought in the name of self-defense. So the concept of self-defense is quite dangerous, and it cannot be recognized, he said. So at the beginning, that kind of discussions were already done in the National Diet. But after that, in 1957, for example, the Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi even said that nuclear weapons for self-defense is also not against the Constitution. And in 1998, just after the atomic bombing tests by India, Mr. Omori, who was the head of the legislative agency, said that the use of nuclear weapons for self-defense is also not against the Constitution, he said. So the escalation is going on.
And of course there's a kind of inflation in the sense that one Prime Minister has an interpretation, which then lays the basis for the next interpretation, and then the basis for the next interpretation. And of course what they're aiming at now is a redrafting that would make it possible for Japan to participate actively in war, provided possibly that there is a mandate, maybe mandate from United Nations, possibly. But I would like to point out one thing in this connection. You see, the Article 9, I do not find it, as I have said already, unreasonable to say that there is room for a self-defense, meaning the Japanese archipelago with defensive weapons, with which you cannot wage war. But the Article 9 does not have anything about other ways of solving international disputes.
Right.
So that would be, of course, mediation. It would be reconciliation with those with whom you have been at war. It would be active peace building, equitable, harmonious relations. There's nothing about that. There is something about benefiting from the fruits of trade. Trade can be highly inequitable, highly exploitative, as Japan has engaged in very much. And as a matter of fact, Japan benefited quite a lot from the surplus from that exploitative trade. Now less, because other countries are doing the same and are outcompeting Japan. And at the same time, if you now interpret Article 9 very strictly and say that it rules out any kind of army, then there is nothing in Article 9 about non-military defense, the Gandhian type defense, let us say. Nothing about that. So from that point of view, a strict interpretation of Article 9 leaves Japan rather helpless. So that is not so positive either. Then imagine you are the head of a government and you are in a problematic world and you come up with things like that. But also because, of course, you want to be cozy and be pleasant to the new daimyo or shogun who lives in Washington. That's where he lives. Now, further down the line, there may be a Lord Asano, and there may be an Akko incident, and there may be a Kira further down the line. I'm not going to harp on that theme. I'm just saying that we are in Japanese history right now. But my major point is this. Article 9 can also be seen as a gift to humanity. Simply denouncing war.
Yeah.
Simply doing that. Now, then a lot of things would have to be added, and I have mentioned some of those things, exactly. But internationally speaking, if Japanese government had taken that line and said, look, we have this Article 9, let's make the best of it. Let us say Article 9 for everybody. And let us simply mobilize our embassy, our whole diplomatic service, whatever we have, to say, we have a protocol in Tokyo, protocol is open, who wants to sign and put Article 9 into their constitution? And we can discuss it, and maybe we can revise it, maybe we can improve it, but the spirit of no war should remain. Now, Japan will become a leader in the world. And right now, Japan is a country in the shadows of the United States. A country going down together with the daimyo. So what is then going to happen? It's up for anybody to make guess. I'll just press Anzai, with your permission, just add one little point more. Because you see, this thing about war is also tricky, and the Japanese government is making use of that. In the Westphalia Treaty of 1648, I think 24 October, they defined war. And a very important element in the definition was that it is declared. So if you don't declare it, it's not war. Now the Japanese government has learned that, so they don't declare. They're not saying we are now going to war against this and that in Afghanistan or that and this in Iraq. They're just simply going there, not declaring it. This has something to do with the enormous importance in the West that is put on the word, not on silence, but on the spoken word. So it's in the Bible, John 1:1, in the beginning was the word. So in the beginning of a war is the word, the declaration. And Japan has also made use of that one. They made use of all the tricks possible. So I think it's important that there is a clear definition of war, which is, of course, the intended effort to decapacitate another. It's going on right now in Iraq and right now in Afghanistan. And opens for the question, there is a conflict there, how could it have been mediated? You are doing very badly, you United States, with your so-called coalition of the willing. How are you going to reconcile after that? So there are many points that come up internationally.
Professor Johan Galtung taught us several decades of years ago that there are many different kinds of violence to be dissolved, not only the direct violence such as wars and arms race, but also the structural violence. And I know that, am I right that the number of people who are driven to death by conflicts or war a year is probably several decades of thousands up to several hundred thousands, maybe. But the number of deaths due to starvation is several million, up to 15 million. I
even
think.
more, actually.
Even more.
Yeah, well, by starvation, yes, but you know, you can count that the structural violence kills about 125,000 every day. 25,000 by starvation, 100,000 by diseases that easily could have been prevented and cured if the world hadn't been run on the market principle. It means that you have to pay for the medicine, and people don't have the money. And much of that system is maintained by the United States of America. So we're getting into millions, and many millions, in fact, exactly as you say. And this is where building peaceful relations come up, because a peaceful relation is not just trade. it's the kind of trade that does not exercise structural violence. And that kind of spirit is, of course, missing from the Article 9. Now, that trade could be dangerous was known very long before I used the expression structural violence. So it was not exactly a new idea, if you will. Now, this is important, and I think it's very important for the Japanese peace movement to say we stand by Article 9. That doesn't mean we think it is perfect.
Yeah.
We are not rejecting any part of it, but one can add to it.
One of my acquaintances told me an interesting figure, or numerical. Professor Masayuki Seto of the University of Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology. He once asked me, how much do you guess if we set up a hypothetical sphere in which all the human beings can be put in, the diameter of the sphere in which 6.7 billion people can be put in. He calculated that, and I calculated to check his result, and we found the same answer, that is only 860 meters. So the human beings is a kind of a sphere of the protein, which has the diameter of 860 meters. So, and the dimension of the Earth, the diameter of the Earth is somewhat 13,000 times greater than that. So the Earth itself has the capability to feed 6.7 billion human beings. So one person every 4 seconds is driven to death due to starvation is not the natural phenomena.
Exactly.
It's a quite social and structural phenomena.
Exactly.
So
Right,
the Japanese constitution must deal with such kind of international disputes, I think.
Just to take 2 points that are very simple.
Yeah.
If you, there are enormous amounts of uncultivated, unattended to areas in the world. You just look at the map of Russia, the map of United States for that matter. As a matter of fact, sitting, it could have a much bigger population. My little country, Norway, with 4.6 million people, could easily feed 12 million. No problem. In other words, we are rich, as you pointed out. But in addition to that, the major point is, of course, the unequal distribution. That it is made in such a way that you have a little group at the top getting much more than they can ever use or spend or eat, and go into speculation and things of that kind. And you have vast masses at the bottom living in misery. It's a shame. It's a shame.
Yes.
So we are up against two major difficulties, and well, I mean, in my terminology, direct violence and structural violence. That means direct peace and structural peace. And I think we know today a lot about how to do it, actually. It's a question of political will.
Yes. Yes, I recognize the importance of the Article 9, of course, and I am the representative of the Article 9 Message Project, which is collecting the letters, pictures, or paintings, which is dealing with the importance of Article 9 or the peace. So I have been very often invited as the speaker of to talk about the importance of Article 9 everywhere throughout Japan. But every time I make my speech before the general public, I feel I have some kind of a complicated feeling, because the people there have the similar value system with me, and they don't need to listen to my speech. They have the idea that Article 9 is important. So it is very important for us to convey what I'm thinking in mind to the people who do not come to that kind of meetings. So the Article 9 Message Project has been printing many different kinds of pamphlets in different aspects of Article 9 and peace, and just be distributing among so many hundreds of thousands of people. That kind of activities are becoming very important.
Very important observation, and a little sociological remark on that one. You see, to go to a meeting means that you have to get out of your house, you have to find a means of transportation, you have to show up on time and so on. Now, what kind of people would do that? They would be the people who want to have their own ideas confirmed by you. And they're not the people who want to be troubled by listening to you. So maybe something wrong, not about you, not about your message, not about the people, but something wrong about meetings. And an alternative to a meeting is, of course, the internet. So I have found personally, when I look at the hits, that I reach many, many more people on the internet than in any meeting I have. Because in a meeting, if you will, there's a feedback. You can get questions, you can even get applause, you can even get standing ovation, you can get all kinds of things. They're good for the ego. But as you point out rightly, it's much more important to reach people who are not convinced.
Right.
So maybe internet is an excellent way of doing that.
There's also the task for the Peace Museum. I'm just directing.
Exactly. Very important.
So people who come to the Peace Museum, it's okay. But we must invite so many people who do not want to come to the Peace Museum.
And your Peace Museum has gone through exactly the same movement. Because when I visited the first time in 1982, it was an anti-war museum.
Anti-war museum,
and it was describing the horrors of war. It was doing that. Now it is much more also a peace museum.
Yes.
And I was designing, which I guess probably is the biggest peace museum in the world, which is in Normandy, outside Paris in France, called Memorial. And I was given a free hand to design it, so I put the major work into positive peace. Because they had already a section, anti-war, namely the Second World War. And then they had a war that didn't become one, the Cold War. So the third section was the Peace Museum. And I found it more interesting to work on the positive aspect. So one should do both. And this Memorial building in Caen, in Normandy, has both. I'm not saying it's the ideal solution to it, but it's very important to leave messages to people who are visitors and don't feel obliged to applaud or to reject or anything. They just are looking at it, and of course they receive some message.
I see. In 2005, the Art Peace Museum, the Kyoto Museum for World Peace, was renewed, and we set up 4 more rooms, not for displaying the wars, but for displaying the structural violence and how to solve that issues.
So that was Article 9b.
You
started with Article 9a, which was the anti-war museum.
And not only displaying what is going on in the world in the sense of structural violence, we also set up a room in which we are introducing the activities of the 12 different NGOs working for peace.
Yeah, exactly.
That is also very important.
We did something similar in Normandy.
Appealing the visitors to think what can be done by themselves. That is very important.
And it's interesting that you, like we in France, used NGOs. Because when governments do it, it's always the so-called national interest. And the national interest is usually political, military, and economic. And economic will often lead to structural violence, and the political, military often to direct violence. Governments are simply not the best, let us say, conveyor belts for peace. But back to A9, the major focus here. I am struck by the fact that it exists. That was already a major achievement. And you know much more about this. I guess it was not actually really written by Japanese, but more by Americans, some governmental, some non-governmental. And they had put a lot of thinking into it. in my view, not sufficient, but a lot went into it. And it was accepted by the Japanese. And the effort to subvert it started immediately.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now. Now, Professor Anzai, what is your prediction? What's going to happen now?
Yes, I know that there are some 7,000 A9 associations throughout Japan. This is very unusual thing, I think. We had maybe 3 such kind of experience in our history, a post-war history. The first one is in 1954, when the big hydrogen bomb test was conducted by the U.S. in the Bikini Atolls. Just after that, the tremendous number of Japanese people...
1954.
54, right. Yeah. A tremendous number of Japanese people shouted for nuclear disarmament. That was the first chance, I think. And the second one was in 1960s, when the Vietnam War was going on. There was a very strong anti-Vietnam War movement here in Japan. And at that time, for example, the 4 million union workers made strikes against Vietnam War. 4 million, that's very much.
Impressive.
Yeah, and the third time was late 1970s, when the SSD, United Nations Special Session devoted to disarmament, was held in 1978. The Japanese people just carried out a very big campaign for nuclear disarmament to send the signatures to the United Nations, and they collected more than 30 million signatures for nuclear disarmament. That was the third. And now we are facing the fourth peace way by the establishment of the A9 association throughout the nation. So it is some kind of hope. But if each A9 association organized 1,000 people, the total is only 7 million, which is not enough to stop the government's move. So we must mobilize ourselves more and more.
I was with one of those groups in Wakayama Prefecture.
Wakayama, yeah.
And it was Shirahara, the White Beach.
Shirahama.
Shirahama,
yeah.
And very impressive. I was struck by the dedication of the people, who were to a large extent retired teachers.
Yeah.
They had much time, much knowledge. They knew everybody knew them. And they were very locally based. In other words, it went in a sense beyond A9 to invigoration of the local community. Local community as the true nature of the people and of Japan.
Yes.
I found that fascinating. They mentioned exactly the same figure, 7,000. And then they talked about local currencies and about traditional crafts and about local self-sufficiency, withstanding the pressure from Tokyo and corporations and things of that type. So there's much going on.
Yeah.
And that leads me as an outsider looking at Japan from the outside, but not totally without some knowledge, to my dear wife, and say and think that even if the Japanese government has no real strategy, they've just taken over somebody else's strategy, the people have. And the people have a spirit which will, I think, internationally play a major role in decades to come. But it has to be developed at a higher level, qualitatively and quantitatively. So if there is a spiritual crisis in Japan, it's above all at the top. And, of course, in the big majority who simply doesn't know in and out, and confused, and then wondering where is this leading. And in that confusion engage in material consumption and find that comforting, at least, precisely for some time. And then you have these very active groups coming up.
Yes.
So what will come out of this, do you think?
I think this movement must be connected with the political move.
It must.
Yes. To
It
change
must.
this.
Right now, almost for the first time, I mean, I've been observing Japan since 1968, so that's
68.
after all 40 years.
Yeah.
There is something resembling a debate in the Diet.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there is LDP and the Democratic Party, DPJ,
Mhm.
the Minchuto, and I only wish that the Democratic Party had a peace strategy, a peace goal.
Okay.
They are quarreling on one issue after the other, and all those issues have to do with Article 9, one way or the other.
Mhm.
Has to do with concessions and contracts and refueling of Navy ships participating in Afghanistan or Iraq. It has to do with hosting, so-called, the bases. You mentioned 130 bases in Japan alone. Now there are 700 US bases in the world,
Mhm.
in 130 countries.
Mhm.
And the US is bankrupt.
Mhm.
And more than bankrupt,
Mhm.
heavily indebted.
Yeah.
The US should actually be in an institution they had, you know, the prison for indebted people, should be put in prison
Mhm.
for not paying its debt. Now that prison doesn't exist, and the US is a little bit big, and nobody quite wants to do it. But that's the fact.
Mhm.
So, what will come out of this?
Mhm. Yes.
Is there a point when there will be a turning in Japan?
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party, headed by one person who was high up in LDP, he knows all the tricks, he knows everything, or so on. And is there a point where there will be a turning, so to speak?
Mhm.
Because as you very well pointed out, it's good with these 7,000 groups, but it has to be connected to the government and the politics of Japan as such.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
And,
cannot be just the Shirahara.
Shirahama.
Shirahama,
Yeah.
I mispronounced it again. I'm sorry.
Last year in July, Japanese people experienced some kind of slight change in political situation in the national election of the House of Councils and
The upper house.
upper house, yes. And I think some of the Japanese students also feel that we can change the society through that kind of social involvement. So I have some hope for them. And I know that Article 9 is quite clear and explicit. I have one interesting story about Ishiwara Kanji, who worked in the backyard of the Manchurian incident in 1931 and later invited to Ritsumeikan University, I said. But he resisted the Tojo Hideki, Prime Minister, who commanded that Pacific War.
Sure.
So the Ishiwara Kanji was not prosecuted the A plus war.
The category A criminals.
Yeah. So and he once in the wartime he insisted on to carry out the wars, the final wars for global peace, final wars for global peace. He said, but just after the World War II in 1947, just after the enactment of the Constitution of Japan, he began to say that the global peace must be accomplished through Article 9. He said so. Article 9 is quite explicit. So.
Well, I mean, no other country has it.
Mm-hmm.
No other country has that article. It's a sensation.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, as an opening statement, you know, in a sense, it's a gift to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up in my mind, when I came to Japan for the first time in my life in January '68,
Yeah.
all the media were filled only with government people,
Mm-hmm.
only with technocrats,
I see.
corporate people, and they all had exams from Tokyo University. Sorry for saying so. You are not quite innocent in that regard, I think. And from Kyoto University. I mean, it was a very limited elite concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same with NHK. Today, it is blossoming with NGOs, with local
Yeah,
movements, old people, young people, enormous amounts of women coming up. It's a kind of underbrush that was concealed before, that is now a vegetation so rich that it's overshadowing these types who used to be running Japan and who are still running Japan, and who are now, I think, to some extent by this wave being pushed out. So I see that as one sign of optimism.
Yeah, right.
And it's very important that these
I agree,
new forces that come up carry such values. And the feeling is they do. I mean, just look at the solidarity, for instance, in villages that are left behind in outlying districts in Japan, because there isn't the money to support them and things of that kind. The kind of movements that come up. 300 places in Japan with local currencies in order to stimulate local buying, to get more circulation in the local economy, things of that type. Well, this is important. Signs of hope.
Yes. I think Japanese people have been beginning to know that the government is not always correct, just as to the pension records issue here. Last year in July, the Prime Minister Abe said that 50 million pension records data are floating in the air, he said. And he said that the 50 million data must be dealt with within a year, he said. But I instantaneously understood that this is a liar, because we know that 1 year is consisting of some only 30 million seconds. So it is impossible to deal with 50 million data in 1 year. So the people is becoming aware that it is not good to do something according to completely depending on the government. So it is my hope also. But you came to Japan in 1968. The 1960s was a very tentative, very active, but on the other hand, a very dangerous decades, I think. As I told you, that we have a very big anti-Vietnam War movement there in 1960s, but in that decades, for example, the government of Japan awarded the Curtis LeMay, the U.S. commander who carried out a strategic, indiscriminate bombing onto Japanese cities and killed some 700,000 people. But the Japanese government awarded the Grand Condon of the Order, that the highest award, I think. So that is also the violation of the spirit of Article 9, I think. The 1960s were the so complicated year, but we must succeed the peaceful mind of 1960s.
Well, that was the extreme in submissiveness to the U.S. To award your own killer, your own murderer, who at the beginning was against bombing the civilian population. But he was persuaded by Arthur Harris, the Englishman who was behind the German bombing, and who started in the early 20s bombing the Iraq rebellion against English colonialism in Iraq. Then went on to dropping bombs on Afghanistan, on the Royal Palace. So he persuaded him that this was the only way to fight a war. Of course, in the spirit that war is the continuation of politics by other means. Curtis LeMay. Very sad, very, very bad. Infinitely bad. You see, this Curtis LeMay you brought up is important because in February 1943, the United States Air Force changed its doctrine. And that was at the behest of Ted Harris, you
Yeah.
see, and the doctrine was
Yeah.
to concentrate bombing
Yeah.
on working class quarters.
Yeah. Right.
Because there people live more densely,
Yeah.
so there's more killing per bomb.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, they may be working in the arms industry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And number three, they are Marxists anyhow,
Yeah. Yeah.
communists.
Mm-hmm.
So that was more or less the philosophy
Mhm.
behind it.
Yeah.
And that was very important in
Mhm.
the concrete bombing strategy inside the cities in Japan. You don't waste bombs on districts where the upper class live because it's too dispersed. Besides, the upper class may be corruptible and may become your friends, which they have seen in Japan
Yes.
to a large extent. So, we are dealing with very ugly forces indeed.
Yeah.
And again, my question is, where is the breaking point for the Japanese government? I suspect there is one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we are drawing this to a close,
Yeah.
and I would like again to hold the banner of A9 high.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it cannot be critiqued, but that's not the point. The point is a signal.
Mm-hmm.
From a European point of view, it's an anti-Westphalia peace signal
Mm-hmm.
that ushered in the state system with the right of war.
Mm-hmm.
And it says this country does not have the right and renounces
Yeah.
the right of
Yeah.
war. Stay with that one and make it a beacon to enlighten the world.
Yeah. Yes. For me, the peace movement, involvement in the peace movement began in 1960 when I entered into the University of Tokyo. And in that year, in 1960, there was a very big peace movement against the Japan-US Security Treaty. So just after I was in the University of Tokyo, I sometimes participated in the demonstration against the US-Japan Security Treaty. I was not in the University of Tokyo, but I was often was in front of the National Diet building. So that was a very important experience for me. I recognized that we can change the society by our own movement, citizen movement. And the Prime Minister Kishi cannot be at the position of the Prime Minister at the time, that he resigned. And that was my first experience to make influence upon the society. And but the younger people now in Ritsumeikan University or others have not experienced such kind of thing, that their movement or their actions can change the society. This is a very important recognition, but they have not yet had such experience. So we must encourage them in all the aspects. And Johan and I once wrote a book about entitled "Is Japan a Crisis?" or something like that, and we both pointed out that autonomy, the concept of autonomy, is very important, and autonomy of Japanese government is almost nothing, and autonomy of the people is very important, and I would like to encourage all levels of people's movement for peace, in the individual peace, NGO peace level, and also governmental level, so international level.
And since you started, Professor Anzai, going back to the early history of Ritsumeikan University, I will end now by going back to Monday, 11 October 1989. The Cold War was ended that day. There were 50,000 people in the streets of Leipzig in eastern Germany. And they had no arms, no nothing. They had torches. And you see, when you keep a torch high, the message is not only light, but it's also, look at my hand, I have no weapons. And they were surrounded by Stasis, by the state police of East Germany. And they were talking about Gandhi, Martin Luther King. And they were arguing for freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and they were arguing for the right to travel. And the head of the police in Leipzig called East Berlin and asked, what shall I do?
Mm-hmm.
And East Berlin said, shoot the violent ones.
Mm-hmm.
And he said with a very sad voice, but there is nobody violent here. And that was the end, you see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What happened then later on in the night was that they called the Soviet ambassador, who called Gorbachev,
Yeah.
who said, I will not intervene,
Mm-hmm.
was the breaking point. And the people brought it about. And 1 month later, the 11th of November, 1989, the wall was opened.
Yeah.
In other words, people's movements matter.
Yeah.
But it's also important that they are non-violent, because
Mm-hmm.
any act of violence will be used as a pretext. It is not only immoral, it's also stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So make a major movement grow
Yeah.
from the bottom up, and
Yes.
keep it
Yes,
non-violent,
yes,
and
yes.
have a positive message.
Yes, that's very important. Yes, I have been usually invited by the general public to make lectures on peace and nuclear issues, something like that, up to 170 times a year. I would like to continue to do that. In 1982, I had a very interesting experience that I was invited by the Japanese dancing teacher. He asked me to make lectures for the students at Shinjuku from 11 p.m. That meeting ended in 1 a.m. in midnight.
Okay,
And,
that's a good meeting
that
time.
was very good meeting time. So I would like to encourage people to invite me, even in midnight. I will go.
This is not a competition, Professor Anzai, but interestingly enough, I gave 500 talks between 1981 and 1983
Oh.
against the escalation by the Americans stationing the missiles and for peace.
Yeah.
3 years, 170 per year. Exactly your figure.
Yeah.
So you see, I had a strong feeling at the end it was all wasted. And I was actually somewhat depressed.
Yeah.
And then came the change. Suddenly came the Social Democrat Party, changing its mind.
Yeah.
And from that point on, whatever was stationed had no soul. It was empty, like the Japanese participation with US is empty. It has no soul, no spirit.
Okay, let's mobilize ourselves to encourage young generations.
For autonomy.
Yeah, for autonomy.